Hey everyone, it's Keith. Welcome back for another episode of Wisdom Share. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about building the business and taking a bigger role in that. So I am pleased to introduce you to Ryan Donovan. He's the CTO of Hootsuite. So Ryan, thank you for joining us. And maybe if you can share with the viewers just a little bit about a history, in your experience.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. I've worked in tech my entire career, started my career at Microsoft, then went to work for a much smaller Canadian software company, which got acquired by a US company, spun the product team out of that in a sale to join Sitecore, one of the leaders in digital experience platforms. I went there, product and engineering teams for a couple of years until I found myself in my current role running product and engineering here at Hootsuite and one of the global leaders in social media management solutions. And along the way, I also did the turn on the board of directors as well to help another Canadian software company achieve their strategic objectives in the market.
Thank you. And I know you've got, over 20 years experience of, building businesses. So take us through a little bit about what does it take to go from having a really cool technology to actually starting to build a business around that?
Well, so first of all, the first thing is you actually have to solve a customer problem, which there's demand for, and being really clear on what that is. And then the second piece of that is really understanding your audience that's going to be wanting that type of solution. And then you actually have to build the channels that will then actually get your solution in the hands of the right audiences. Those are kind of the pieces that all need to come together. And you can't really have one without the other. So a good example is, and then along the way, you also have to get your pricing and packaging right so that you're not giving away too much along the way. Because like I've seen many examples in my career of like great technology that was a solution looking for a problem, or something that was priced improperly, so it's really hard to claw back, take it back, or companies that just weren't living up to their full potential in the market.
So tell me a little bit about this. So you mentioned product strategy, and that one's interesting to me for a couple of reasons, but what do you mean by that? And what are kind of the fundamental skills that you need to have to make that go right?
Right. So I think there's really kind of two key pieces, which is one, what's the problem that you're going to solve, for which there's actually demand in the market? And then as you go about that, what's unique or special about you? Like, why would you go with, your solution versus, the guy or gal down the street? That is, and you really have to have both. And then, once you've got both in place, then you actually have to generate demand around that in the market so that it actually connects the product with the right audiences. Then as you do that, get customers coming in the door, get the feedback circle going, and then you kind of get into a virtuous circle of getting that feedback and using that to create the next iteration of the product.
Yes, that's interesting. Having worked with some startups myself, so when you were saying feedback, is what you were talking about is just continually getting customer validation about the steps that you're taking?
Absolutely. And also thinking about, okay, how do I expand my market, either in a different industry, for example, or what's the next adjacent use case so that you can always be growing? It's very rare that you'll see something that's going to get true, one trick pony per se. But so you always have to be thinking about what's the next adjacent problem, or what's the next adjacent industry vertical or segment of users that you can bring your solution to.
And so when you think about product strategy, is that the hard part of building a company?
It certainly is. The go-to-market strategy is probably equal hard part, because they're really, it's really a two-sided coin. Product strategy gets you into the market, gets you the thing to sell. The go-to-market strategy actually gets it in front of the right audiences.
Do you see a correlation between building a business around the technology? Does that correlate with what CIOs and CISOs might be building internally, providing a service to their internal business groups?
There oftentimes could be a very strong correlation. The trick would be saying, if I'm building something internally, is there a market for it externally? And then if so, how would you capitalize upon that? As a for instance, innovation can happen anywhere, but usually the things that are the most successful is you take a problem that's a reasonable degree of user pain associated with it, and you solve it gracefully, and that's how you get the makings of a good product.
And I assume you can't just ever just sit still. You've just always got to be moving, because the minute you start sitting, your competitors are right on your tail.
Absolutely. And that's why you always have to be thinking about like who's the next audience or what's the next use case, and constantly be expanding that out, preferably in both directions, because that's how you get to like true high growth. And then once if you're really one of the fortunate few and you've made enough off of that, then you can start to think about entirely new categories as opposed to adjacent use cases and products.
Yeah, and just on a personal note, what's your favorite part? Is your skills aligned with like building the technology, or are you really kind of a CTO that kind of helps drive the business?
I'd like to think of myself as somebody that's ambidextrous, because I've run both product and engineering almost my entire career, and so I have I have just as much fun coming up with the product strategy about how we win in the market as I do thinking about, okay, what's the right and most efficient technology to actually go build it.
So are you a really technical guy?
Oh yes, as you probably from the copious amounts of equipment over my shoulders, I am. I love technology.
I was just thinking maybe that was just your backdrop.
Oh no, this is all for real, and everything behind me has a dedicated use case for something.
All right. Well, here's the magic question. So we get a lot of questions, and a lot of senior level guys that are really looking for ways to make their way to a board level,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you're a technical guy, CTO, that defies some logic that you have earned your way onto advisory boards. So tell us a little, not advisory boards, but the board. So tell us a little bit, like, how did you earn that, and what were some of the steps you took?
Well, so the number one step you have to do is network, and that's why it's really important that you get out and network within the community. So a good example is, this is something I've always tried to do. So good examples, I'm a startup mentor through the Amazon Web Services networking program. I also get involved in British Columbia Technical Association. I have also mentored folks that have reached out to me on LinkedIn, because that's how you build the relationships and networks that come up that really and make it clear that you're interested in helping out in that way, because that's how oftentimes you'll end up getting an invitation to be on a board. So a good example was, the way I got involved in the board of the last company is a company out of Ottawa called Tamoye Community Software. They had a very successful exit to NewsGator. And it was a case of Cactus, the CEO, who was my boss at the time. He was on their board because he was quite familiar to some of their investors. We had some investors in common, and the investors knew me. And he said, well, he knew what I was trying to do in terms of getting out into the community, especially because I just moved across the continent at the time. And he said, one evening, he's like, "And why don't you come have dinner with these folks and meet them and just see?" And we got into I got into a conversation with the founder and CEO, and ended up being a really fulfilling conversation, to the point that I got asked if I'd be interested in joining their board with a focus on product and technology advice. And I said yes. And in that role, spending really helping them do two things. One, I ended up doing a lot with the founder and CEO on product strategy and channel strategy, and really getting beyond kind of their core use case, because they built an amazing piece of technology around building communities of practice, and they were being very successful into selling this into the public sector. And I said, well, there's a lot of companies that could use this that are outside the public sector. So started to work with them to help start to build a strategy to take advantage of their technology in other industries, and also start to build their channel, like with relationship with Microsoft, et cetera. So they started partnering closely with Microsoft, et cetera. And that was how those pieces came together that saw them get through to a successful exit, because NewsGator, when they saw that they had a broader solution around communities of practice, said, hey, that would really fit well into our broader community management play, and ended up acquiring. And so this was, that was a perfect example of, somebody had been really focused on a very specific industry vertical, and just by broadening their horizons and thinking about other industries and then channels to get to those industries, they got a result pretty quickly.
Interesting. That's great. And I was just about to, because it does make sense to me that especially these days, technology should be represented on the board because it's probably such an important direction these companies need to take for different reasons. And what are your thoughts about, how, the impact that CIOs and CTOs can have on businesses and the perspective they can bring that's unique to the board?
I think that there really does need to be a role for CTOs or CIOs or CTOs, chief product officers, on board of directors, because if you're a technology company, that's your lifeblood, and that's your lifeblood. And if you're not a technology company, then you need to be thinking about what's your digital strategy, your digital transformation, and making sure that you've got representation there. Because if COVID-19 has taught industries as a whole anything, it's that if you weren't ready to go all in on digital, you were going to likely be lapped by your competitors that were, because those that were able to go pivot to digital first, the quickest, fastest, are the ones that have benefited the most throughout this rather unfortunate global pandemic.
And so we've got a number of students at universities who'll be watching some of these with us. Is there any just high level lessons that you've learned through your career that you think might be useful to them?
I think if I was to advise anyone that's in a university student role, it's like there's two things to consider. If you're on the more of a business track, throw some technology in there so that you're digitally savvy, because unless you're going into something like, medicine or psychology or something like that, you're going to be, technology is going to be a big part of almost anyone's career. Conversely, if you're on a technology or engineering track, throw some business in there, because the most successful people I know are those that can transcend both.
So those are all the questions. Any other thoughts you have that are relevant to this?
I'll say never get complacent. Always be hungry. Always be like Jeff Bezos, take a day one mentality. Always be looking at yourself, because industries are changing so rapidly. And if you look at just how much has happened in the last 12 months alone from a digitization perspective, it just goes to show you that preparedness is everything. Be ready to reinvent yourself on a dime. I mean, it's just incredible to me to see, for example, how even digitally preferred channels for customer contact have shifted so much just in 12 months.
On the B2B and the B2C side.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. We're getting up to time, so I want to be respectful of your time. But I do appreciate you sharing your thoughts with everyone today, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Keith. It was an absolute pleasure to join you today. Really appreciate it.
Hope you heard a few things that triggered some new thinking for you. We do these conversations on IT topics weekly, so please feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you get updates on new content, as well as you can post comments and, more importantly, suggest topics that you'd like us to address. You can see that we have some pretty amazing resources. So please let us know how we can help you on your upcoming digital transformation and enterprise IT projects. Thanks very much. Until next time.